The thoughts I want to share are basically on energy in Ontario farms. We're still the #2 industry in Ontario. When the auto industry looked like it was having a rough time, we were briefly #1. But happily, we're back to #2. We don't like to be #1 because of other people's problems. Okay. We, all of us, relate to energy in different yet very similar ways. Similar for those of us who wake up feeling like they don't have any energy, and similar for our fridges, cars, office equipment, as they all plug in the wall or a gas station. And yet it's different, as the industry here combines old and young stardust to put energy on wires, and my industry, farming, combines old stardust with summer starshine to put energy on plates. Both are essential. Why does all this matter? 90 years ago, half of a 100-acre farm was for energy. Nothing but 30 acres of bush heated the home, 18 acres of pasture, hay and grain fed horses, 5 acres of gardens, the orchard, scratching hens, rooting hogs fed the family. Energy costs were 50% of the operation. 50% of the land, 50% of the labor. Happily, replacing horses and firewood freed up acres for food for market. Diesel and hydro helps feed today's 7 billion people. In the next 30 years, farmers must feed 2 billion more while using scarcer, more costly energy. And at the same time, we must take the ghosts of the dinosaurs that we emit as greenhouse gases from fossil fuels and return them back to the ground. Why do farmers have to do this? Because they're the only people who can. We put carbon back in the earth about a ton per acre every acre we work in this province. We are almost carbon neutral. We put in 2 and 3 tons per acre, we'll be carbon negative in a very big way. Very carbon negative, if we can do it. Some fellows are already doing it. Canadian invention called no-till. It made the grain operations throughout the world now emit far less carbon, about 20% of what they used to. Because plowing freed up carbon every year from the ground. And it matters because energy feeds us, and too much of the wrong kind is poisonous. So, the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to touch on pipelines, propane, diesel, natural gas, hydro, oil prices, and climate warming. Pipelines, they're topical, they're in this region. Line 9B is being reversed, Energy East is going to be added. Alberta wants Keystone to go from Fort McMurray to the US Gulf. The policy around pipelines, very straightforward. For 55 years, national energy policy was about oil and gas with a wee top up with nuclear. Policy was to produce oil and gas out west, export enough from those provinces to the US, also send your ill-behaved kids out there for a couple of years, shake them up. That's why I got sent out there. And it would offset import costs for Eastern Canada. The big thing it did for Canada, it isolated Canada from world prices. That's why Alberta was all upset back in the 70s when I worked for Mr. Lougheed. They wanted world prices because they were selling. Mr. Trudeau didn't want world prices because he was acting on behalf of buyers. And usually there are more buyers than sellers, so it was good politics. And sane economics for the country. Paying world prices when you don't have to isn't necessarily a grand idea. Why would you pay $3 for lemonade when the kid down the street's giving it away at 2 bits? Okay, nuclear policy. What was nuclear about? It was to develop technology so Canadians would be paid for something besides raw uranium. Besides, the market for nuclear bombs, everybody sort of hoped that was going to shrink, and it has. Policy made Canadian energy costs lower than those in Europe, and that is changing. U.S. shale oil and gas reduces U.S. imports, curbs it. Our federal government sees Canada as an energy export. Exports need pipelines. Alberta wants to export dilute bitumen to the US Gulf. Why? Because they no longer have enough natural gas to process it in Alberta. You need natural gas, you strip the hydrogen out of it, you inject it into this raw bitumen or the boiled bitumen to make synthetic crude. If you run out of natural gas, which is happening, you can't do it any longer, so you send it where they have natural gas, which turns out to be Louisiana, and it also has a seaport. If they get their pipeline. If they get their pipeline, will that be good for you? It will be if you own shares in TransCanada Pipe. If you do not own shares in TransCanada Pipe, and if you do, you will be paying closer to the world price for oil products of all kinds, and gas products, and propane. And that ain't necessarily good for farms or forestry or commuters or rail or truckers or gas electrical generation. It will disadvantage Canadian farms and manufactured goods wherever they're sold, here and abroad. Pipelines are safer than rail, no question about it. But more production for export is going to stretch supplies. We'll be better off if we suit Canadian production to Canadian needs, limit new exports, shorten supply, and boost prices here. And in limiting those exports, we're not doing anything to harm our neighbors to the south. We're going to save their natural gas for longer and better uses. And it's for export, not for use in Louisiana. They have lots. It'll be on the seaport because it'll be going somewhere else again. Those people want it, no question about it, but we've got it right now. We could stretch it out a bit. Propane, it was news last winter, and there may be a theme to this energy stuff. It's all in the news. What about this winter? Half of rural homes, over 400,000 families here, heat and cook with propane. Last winter was hard, cold for people in the US South. The result was propane shortages and prices here up 35 to 85%, depending on the kind of contract you had. Will this change? Well, prices went down this past summer. Come January, who knows? If you're in Arizona or Miami, it won't matter a whole lot to you except for your barbecue. But long term, investors do not feel it is worthwhile to improve supply. Profits are better with inadequate supply. Just ask the good folks at Enron, those who are left. They believed in short supply, and it worked for a while. Propane prices go hard on hog, poultry, and greenhouse producers, and 50% of rural homeowners. High propane prices are likely a long-term question on an on and off again basis. For farmers, the choice is get a gas line to your gate or move to a place with a gas line. High propane cost means energy conservation can save more dollars for propane users than for gas heated farms or homes. About 3 times more, because on a BTU basis, propane's 3 times the cost of natural gas. But no propane vendor offers a conservation program. I wonder why. For municipalities with a lot of rural homes, farms, propane-reliant businesses, they want those businesses to stick around. They might be interested in a conservation program that's basically takes the brochures, cuts out the word natural gas, and puts in the word propane. It's education, it's low cost, and it's a high payoff. In the farm community, it'll go over real big. There are other ways of saving on the farm. We're not what we'd call a knowledge industry, but we do a bit of genetics. My daughter and son-in-law do quite a bit of it, I guess. I've a new grandfather in the last couple of days. And to their credit, they both have doctorates in genetics, and I never thought that that'd be possible for them. But there we go. I mean, the reproduction, having studied it, I figured they would have lost the interest, but there you go. The animal and stock genetics can make a real difference. A more cold-tolerant hog and a more cold-tolerant chicken or turkey will use less propane. And you can feed it his heat for less than you can use propane, because everything it eats will turn into heat. But all that propane, 90% of it just goes straight through the roof. So, road fuels and farm diesel. This is where the oil spills on the road, I guess. Road fuel, it's the big energy cost. It's the one that we all take for granted. We sort of feel we have to take for granted. If you actually paid for attention to fuel prices, it just depresses. So it only makes the news every long weekend. Therefore, it must be important. Everybody sort of realizes gas and diesel prices are higher than the price of crude suggests they should be. Why is that? Well, oil customers know consumers make only the feeblest of efforts to reduce their gasoline use. No one on the 401 drives 100 kilometers an hour to save 2 liters of gas per 100. Until that changes for 35% of drivers or more, fuel prices are going to stay high. The quick survey I make with farmers is how many of you drive a Volkswagen diesel as well as a Fendt or an AGCO diesel? Well, none of them drive Volkswagen diesels. Their fuel efficiency is strictly in the field. On the 401, they're like the rest of us, like me. I know better than best. So, the other part of these high prices is taxes. Governments are terrified of drivers. They are absolutely petrified about raising fuel taxes. As a result, in the last 24 years, there's been one increase. It was the 2% added to HST on fuel. That's it. All the other federal and provincial taxes have gone unchanged for 2.5 decades. Had we chosen to put just half the rate of tax that the Europeans have on their gas and diesel, every province and the federal government would be completely debt-free if we'd done that when OPEC crisis first kicked in. As it is, we are completely debt-free, but my granddaughter is not. I gave her an IOU in a little onesie there. I pinned on an IOU for my $128,000. And unless you reproduce in similar numbers, about a third of you also pinned on that IOU. The little girl is a little over $500,000 in debt. No wonder she cries. Okay, that's taxes, but we do pay a tax. I call it the Rob and Doug Ford tax. But it's applied across the country. Every day Torontonians idle away roughly 1 million liters sitting in traffic. That's $350,000 a day in taxes to governments and $1 million to oil companies. It's just as much a tax as the $350,000. You didn't go half a kilometer for those liters. You didn't go anywhere. What do you get for it? You got $400 million a year for bad air and 6 lanes of parking. And Toronto can't figure out how to fund the subway. That's why it's the Rob and Doug Ford show. This puts up fuel costs nationwide. It happens in Toronto, it happens in Ottawa and Montreal, it happens in every large city. It puts up costs nationwide for every business, including farms, so it makes transit a farm and a suburb issue too. Canada can't tax fuel. We can pay our debts, and we can provide something for our children, or we can stay on the path we're on, opt for cheap fuel now, and pay the oil firms instead. If you're a pessimist, my shares in oil companies, they're down right now. Wait another couple of weeks. They're ideal for purchasing if you're a pessimist, or a realist possibly. They will come back, because I don't see us taxing fuel in a hurry. Natural gas, how am I doing on the clock, by the way? Is there a clock watcher?
You got about 10 minutes left?
10 minutes?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I will do that. Natural gas. It's a make or buy choice, everything is. So Manure or silage and digesters, sewage treatment and landfills, they produce methane. Mike showed us how. Farms and municipalities can follow through. Homemade methane can be and is competitive. Compare the cost. Gas heat for an ordinary home, $1,000 for a winter. And that does your cooking as well on that $1,000. And it dries your clothes and heats your water for $1,000. Oil heat, $2,000 for the winter, but it doesn't cook and it rarely heats your water and it doesn't dry your clothes. Propane, $3,500, but you get the whole works for that again. You do get your cooking and your hot water. Electricity, heat, $5,500. You add a little bit more to cook and hot water for that. This past winter, I had lots of farmers who paid over $7,500 to heat their homes. Larger homes, no insulation. I guess money doesn't mean much to them. $7,500, sit in that home for 40, 50 years, $350,000 to heat the place in present terms for a lifetime. I can think of better things to do with $350,000, and they don't involve lottery tickets. After 40 years in a house, you're that kind of money behind, as mentioned. Well, you can turn that into big screen TVs, bigger than this one if you want. Cruise ships, dental work for the kids, false teeth for yourself. Charities are your favorite kind. No student debt for the kids. Home heat has real costs, makes quite a difference. Natural gas is a cheap way to go, or make your own. If just 300,000 of the 700,000 rural families and half of the farms out there had gas, that would save them over $800 million a year. And that is why natural gas is an OFA energy priority. And we've had some success, happily. We've got $200 million in the provincial budget, which we intend to leverage with money from Union and Enbridge and ourselves. We believe that we'll build with that money, we'll build about 13,000 kilometers of new gas line in the next 2.5 years, and put 180,000 customers on that gas line. And they will start saving the way you've been saving all along. Oh, that is our view on natural gas. We think it's a real good thing for those who have it, and a real good thing for those who are going to get it. And we intend to make that a fairly large number. Sorry, we're having a little page separation problem there. The hydro. Now we're getting to the things you know a whole lot about, so this is where I can begin to start waffling. Hydro makes the news just twice a year, end of April and end of October, about 3 days before the new rates kick in. So last week, ruined Halloween with new increases all around on hydro. End of April's nice because you're paying taxes in anyhow, who notices? So everybody loves hydro, just no one wants to pay for it. In the 1990s, we loved it so much that we froze the rates for 11 years. And we rolled the cost increases into the debt. When we did that, the debt grew by the equivalent of 3 years' cost for power delivered in Ontario, by about $30 billion. It's what we saved customers at the time by not putting it on their power bills and putting it on the debt. 3 years free power equivalent in a decade. So how did Ontario use that free power for 3 years? I don't think we did. We just burned it. I don't think anybody could point at anything and say, here's what we got for that. When you look at your federal debt, you could look and point and say we have 18 new harbors there, and 6 new prisons, and 65 new fighter planes, and 12 destroyers, among other things. You could look at it. But when you look at the $30 billion we spent on hydro and didn't pay, what did we have for that? Well, somewhere between diddly and less. And Les ain't very happy sitting next to diddly. So, we get back to what are hydro prices, what are we really paying? What we're really paying is 270,000 lost jobs in manufacturing the last decade. That's what we're paying. We would have lost some of those anyhow. It's cheaper to do things in China and India and Bangladesh, no question about it. A lot of those jobs were going to go. There are about 90,000 of the 270, which I believe are gone because of hydro prices. We're not paying an arm and a leg, we're paying with jobs. And those fellas without jobs, some of them are like young Irishmen in the 70s and 80s. They didn't just go sit in pubs. They talked to each other about how rough things were and how badly they were being treated. So some of them met their farm neighbors and they bought some ammonium nitrate and they went down to the Imperial Oil Station and got some diesel and they played Let's Make a Bomb. There are 10,000 late lamented Irish people as a result. Unemployment turns people into nastier people, doesn't make them better. So hydro prices have a big, big cost. So the make or buy question applies to hydro as well. Combined heat and power is happening. I did a survey for a large firm 20 months ago now. 9,000 plus farms were surveyed. I got 750 absolute perfect responses back. What were in those responses? Well, of the 750, 1/3 of the operators were too small to participate in a demand response program. They really weren't worth the paperwork. Of the rest who were big enough, over 500, all but 8 had gone quietly off the grid in peak hours and when they needed heat. They'd gone to CHP without asking anybody. They hadn't canceled their Hydro One contract. They still paid at that time their $85 a month service charge. That was cheap backup. No paperwork involved, just send a check once a month. And they use some power every now and then. Let Hydro think you're still a customer, why not? In Newfoundland, they do have a liquor control board, but mostly they buy from St. Pierre and Miquelon. Well, that's what's going on here, only they're buying from themselves. Malls, hospitals, and offices want this too. And many malls in southern Ontario have now gone to combined heat and power on exactly the same basis as their farm neighbors. Hospitals are required to go off grid once a month for about a day to test their backup generator. It's a good idea. They are not allowed to connect that backup generator and run the hospital for the day with it. They just have to know the generator now works, not whether the connection works. They want to run it 28 days a month in February, 29 in leap year, and 30 and 31 all the other months. Why? Because they can do it for about 9 cents, which in Toronto would save them 15% plus. In a rural area, it would save them 50%. That's the way it is. Why? In a rural area right now, pretty much all power is 18 cents a kilowatt hour in a mid-peak hour. A little less in off-peak, a little more in peak. But call it 18 cents in a nice round number, twice what it is in Ohio. And I have met frequently with the economic development people in Ohio, and they really want to get Ontario greenhouses to just float across Lake Erie and move into Ohio. Why not? Well, there are some reasons why not, but they're pushing. Gas or biofuel make heat and power less expensive than hydro alone. You can save money, that's the short one. So, Federation of Agriculture, together with the Ontario Manufacturers Alliance, has a hydro price proposal. I want to go through this, and then we'll do a little bit on climate warming, and then we'll be done. The proposal: remove all provincial taxes from all rates. Every customer would be tax-free. That's the 8% part of the provincial HST, and the debt retirement charge is 0.7 cents a kilowatt hour. Together they total $1.6 billion. The minute you change those tax rates, you boost the residential and commercial rates. So they get a wee little bit of a reduction, but they don't see anything happen. It's robbing Peter to pay Paul. Who's Paul? Paul is your farmer and your manufacturer in Ontario. Their rates would fall from the 10 cents roughly average for industry and 18 for farms. They'd fall by 32% for industry. And with that lower rate, the total cost for power goes from 18, including taxes, that's 18 billion for a year, down to 16.4 billion for a year. The revenues for all the generators, all the utilities stay the same. The costs for industry go from their $5 billion share currently of that 18 down to 3.2 billion of the 3.4 billion, sorry, of the 18. A massive cost that will go into investment and will draw additional money for investment on top of that. Every $1 million in investment will be about 4 new jobs, a little less than that. But we're talking $1 billion plus savings in industry with a top up of another $1.5 billion. We're thinking 9,100 extra jobs a year on top of the 95,000 jobs that Ontario likes to create every year when things are taken over not too badly. This is a big deal. Can add 10% to the manufacturing growth rate, no problem. In an industry which is looking at declines right now. Farms, we laid off 20,000 people in the last 3 years. Why? Higher mandated wages and higher power costs. It's as simple as that. 20,000 people in rural areas where employment is tough. Okay, who's going to pay for this? Well, your friendly local government. That is your provincial government, not consumers. But with those 9,100 people extra every year, 45,000 at the end of 6 years, what do you have? You've got people paying taxes, income taxes and HST. The money that leaves the provincial government coffers will pour back in spades. So, we believe it works. And we'd like you to think about it and tell your MPPs about it, which leads us to the sort of, where does all the effluent come together? It comes together in the air and in the water. Primarily in the air nowadays as climate warming, climate change. We call it climate change not because it's just warming, but also it's oceanic warming, it's ground warming, it's faster winds, it's higher humidity. And yeah, we're the last half page to go. I'm slowing down. It's getting weak. And we've got about a year to get them together on this in this country, because that's the deadline on negotiations that the United Nations Climate Panel has set. Otherwise, we will be left out. So we're approaching Remembrance Day. We could recall that Ontario Farms and Ontario Hydro have a history, a very important history, particularly from 1939 to the end, early 1942, when those two groups, Hydro and Farms, fed and powered the forces of good on this earth. We fed armies. Ontario industry clothed those armies, armed those armies, put the ships, the planes together that moved them. Over 500,000 trucks came out of the now defunct Studebaker plant in Hamilton. General Motors, not too far down the road, made just as many trucks. More than 1.5 million trucks in 6 years for this place. Not pickup trucks, heavy trucks. They were the trucks of the Russian army, and they were the trucks of the French army, what was left of it. They were the trucks of the British army, and even Americans used Canadian trucks for a long time. It was a big deal. Well, There was an attitude that made that happen, and we can bring that back in our present efforts to deal with climate change. It's going to require an attitude that says, yes, we're willing to pay for this, we're willing to do this, and at the same time, we'll be bringing down our power costs and making them greener, making them more local, making our use of it vastly more efficient. So Ontario farms, the industry right here in this building and next door, can take carbon out of the air, put it back in the soil, and put it in a great deal more slowly than we've been doing it. This is a vision for a low-carbon Ontario with a farm industrial price where we can make gas and CHP when that makes sense and address climate change. It's a future for energy, and it's a future for us. We can all help it along. As every future, including our present, has had a great deal of help from those who went before us. So at Remembrance Day, remember, it's those who went before us. Fortunately, we're not really fighting in the normal sense. We have other battles, and I want you to join in if you can. Thank you very kindly for your attention.
If there's any questions, well, we have Ted up here, that would be.
I tend to weed along by using every minute, so there's no time for questions, but I will. Yes, sir.
Ted, I'll have a question. The amount of natural gas trapped in southwestern Ontario, do you have an estimate of, I understand there's a lot of natural gas in southwestern Ontario.
Conventional natural gas produces about 1.5–2.5% of Canadian requirements, something in that range.
I see.
I don't know what that is in cubic meters, but it was first extracted about 1850, and it's been going now for 165 years at low levels of production.
And one more question. Would it make sense, and has anyone been trying to convince our friends in Alberta to power their steam generation by nuclear?
Atomic Energy Canada has approached the developers of oil sands plants. We considered it in 74 to 76 as we were developing the oil sands policy. The general thought was that in due course, environmental objections would be the objections to oil sands. A certain politician has told me they'd be damned if white pelicans were going to stop this. There are about 400 white pelicans that had a lake up there. So the basic decision was radioactive oil sands. That'd be a real tough sell along with fur coats in Britain. It was an optics question and to some extent a cost question. Because natural gas was cheap and a nuclear plant wouldn't be, and capital was a big deal, and interest rates at that time were 12%. So that's not an answer, but it's a form of reasoning.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
That's all. Thank you very much, Ted.